thank you for those that are joining us. Youth Soccer Coaches webinar. Oh, again, another one. I told you. And that is usually a Monday, but it's a Sunday this week. So you've actually had 2 webinars in 7 days. We're spoiling you a little bit there, aren't we? So I'm pleased that you can join us as I welcome Helen Nkwocha. How did I do?
That was better than me. You said it better than I usually say it.
To discuss culture. I'm not saying it again. To discuss culture and coaching. So the mic should be off as you've come in. Looks like it. Yeah. We encourage questions through the chat or directly to me, and I'll pick up those ones at the end of the presentation. So the webinar will be available probably a week or 2 turnaround after this. So if you keep an eye out on our Facebook page at Youth Soccer Coaches, Twitter at Youth Soccer Coaches, and our website. Helen is a UEFA A licensed coach and has 3 years working within player development in China. Background including New York Red Bulls, Middlesex County Girls Centre of Excellence, Millwall Lioness FC, Gillingham FC Girls Centre of Excellence, and current head of youth at TB, a club in Faroe Islands. I will now hand over to Helen. She might need to share your screen. Yeah, you're all set to go.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you very much, Craig. Thanks for having me on the webinar as well. And obviously, thank you everybody for choosing to tune in. Let me just try and share my screen. If you see something that doesn't look like it will be a part of the webinar, just pretend you can't see it. Ignore it. No family photographs. Put this on.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Oh, we're in. I think we're in.
Yay.
We are totally in.
Fantastic. Okay, I'll try not to jabber on for too long. So basically, I've been coaching. I haven't been coaching for that long, actually. I think in the scheme of things, most coaches my age have probably been coaching for about 15, 20 years. I've only been coaching for 10 years, and the first 2 I was also playing. So this is basically me looking back a little bit at the different places that I've worked at and conversations. And I'll try to keep some parts general, but obviously there'll be times when I might have to relate it to what I actually have experienced. I'm currently the head of youth at a club called TB, which is the oldest club in the Faroe Islands. We have a men's team who operate at the highest domestic level here in Faroe Islands. And we have youth teams which range from 2 years old, well, not a team for a 2-year-old, so we have kindergarten, 2-year-olds up to the age of 17. So those are, that's like the setup of the club. We do some schools coaching. Hopefully we'll start female development soon. I'm about to introduce monthly meetings. So my job is just to support the development of the coaches and also obviously help with the development of our players into the first team. And we've got a couple of national team players. So we've got a realistic pathway for our youth players into the national team. So I've written down here the why. I've chosen to discuss culture because in my experience, culture is one of the biggest influences on my coaching experience. And I was also taught a few years ago when I was in China that it's the most important question that a player can ask a coach, which is why. So we should always try to know why we deliver certain things, why we don't deliver certain things. And we should encourage our players to be inquisitive enough to ask the question as well. So I've had to wait a few years before I could actually like post this type of picture, because obviously it's youth players and you need to be aware of the protection of the welfare of the children publishing their photographs. So this was a few years ago, and I apologise for my bandy legs. very tight Chelsea shorts, not the best, so I apologise for that. So these are 12 to 16-year-old boys, and my job at Chelsea and the foundation side was to coordinate one of the programs, which was basically coaching boys that were perceived to be naughty. So the way of life of a people, including their attitudes, values, beliefs, modes of perception, and habits of thought and activity. So naughty boys, and I think as soon as you label someone, you're in danger of, you know, forcing them to maybe stagnate their own growth. I don't think that you're able to rise to low expectations. And I think that if we have the attitude that the person who's in front of us is a certain type of person, then immediately I think we're making our conversation and our interaction a lot more challenging than it probably needs to be. These boys, I absolutely loved them. I loved these boys. They were really naughty. So I'd turn up at their school to work with them, and almost always they are in the classroom having a confrontation with the teacher. They're locking the door, there's a chair flying, and then they realise that they're about to start football, and all of a sudden they're like model citizens. So the reason I loved some of the photographs that we took was because it was really who they were. They were just young boys who struggled with a few things, and the opportunity to have football actually helped to change the perception of many of the teachers. So the modes of perception, the data that they were collecting about the young boys was quite negative. And when the teachers were able to see them in our football sessions, it helped the teachers just adjust their perception of these young so-called naughty boys. So obviously I'm a black female coach. When I was coaching in England, about 6 or 7 years ago, so that's how long I've been away, it was really tough. In the top flight, I think there was only one female head coach, and that was, I think it was Emma Hayes. No one else. I really looked up to Hope Powell. She created an excellent program with the English Football Association, which mentored female coaches. And she sat in and on the sessions and asked us questions about our session design. And it was really nerve-wracking, and it was excellent pressure. So I just looked at the female aspect of coaching. So a couple of facts that I managed to find. I didn't go fact overload. I didn't like hunt down loads and loads of facts. And there were some facts which I couldn't find. I couldn't find any data which related to someone like me. There was no data that I could find about black female coaches or coaches of colour, female coaches of colour. So obviously now there are more female head coaches back home in England in the top flight, which is testament, I think, to the work being done to increase the visibility and the opportunities for female coaches. Now, habits of thought in relation to race, and it varies from country to country. So what can you do about what you think? Do you know what I mean? You think what you think, and I think how you articulate your thoughts, that's what you need to be mindful of as a coach. And for me to be coaching in different countries is one thing, but sometimes you're just coaching in different cultures. So I worked for a semi-professional men's club back home in England. I wasn't on the men's side. I actually worked with the U14 boys. So I was the only female coach, and I was one of 2 coaches of colour at the club. And they weren't used to having a female coach. So the female side was more of an anomaly to them. But the habits of thought in that environment it actually turned out to be really, really challenging, because the leaders were the ones who struggled more than the actual players. Players are players. And when we give them a chance to have confidence and to learn and to make mistakes and to have structure and consistency, players, I've found, are exactly the same everywhere that I've worked, in every environment, whether it's back home in England or obviously overseas. So in reference to coaching insights, back home, obviously, we've got the English DNA, which I've had for about 12 years now, I think. Efficiency, which we had a lot of emphasis on efficiency back in China. And obviously you can think of like the Germans, how you would recognize German football if you took away the jersey and you couldn't see the national flag, you would recognize the German style of play. So culturally, do we know what Spanish football looks like? If we don't know that they're Spanish teams, yeah, we do. And the same, I think, can be said for back home in England with the national team. And obviously, my experience in the US is pretty similar. You can tell what nationality team you're working within. What I'm finding in my current role is that there's a lot of learning to be done, but it's also quite sensitive because people are very proud of their culture. So when you're starting to think about coaching insights, you've got to respect the cultural aspect of each country as well. I know that back home in England, there was a role that was actually created by the English FA to have an experienced football person actually go off to do the academy visits worldwide so that we can improve. And that's what helped create our actual DNA for how we learnt to start creating the more technically gifted footballers that we're seeing now in the Premier League and travelling over to Germany, etc. So what we're just looking at here is just something which I'm introducing at my current club. And I know that most people would be used to seeing like a mission statement or values or, you know, what your own club agreement is and all the players buy into it. But I think for creating, I apologise, but I think for creating culture in your coaching, there needs to be buy-in. And that is really tough. I think getting buy-in is really tough, especially if the messenger isn't a familiar leader. So for me, as a female coach of colour in a leadership role, the culture in coaching isn't that I am a typical leader. So the perception and the mode of thought in relation to who is sending that message, that's what can be challenging when you're trying to develop a culture or when you're trying to reinforce a culture. So I think that values within a club are essential for us to develop and improve, and also keep improving even if we think they're doing a good job. So right now, having our families understand our values and then we can reinforce it, that's the biggest challenge that I'm finding. But I also do think that it's essential to any footballing environment. When I was in California, I used a method which I was taught in China to sort of punctuate the culture in the environment in the club that I worked at. So I used, some people might know already, the 4 agreements. And the 4 agreements is nothing to do with football or soccer. It's nothing to do with sport. So the 4 agreements is, I think it's actually based on meditation. But for my efforts to improve, or at least to create a culture which the players were familiar with and which was consistent, the 4 agreements was applied to us as coaches in China, and it helped us work to a process. So in California, using the 4 agreements, which is always try your best, don't take things personally, don't make assumptions, and be impeccable with your word. So those were the 4 agreements. And that became the culture that I introduced with my players when I worked in California, and it's what they needed, and they responded fairly positively to it. So I think creating that culture is really, really important. So identifying what is important. So all I've done here is I've just highlighted some different areas that I think help to break it down. Obviously it changes for everybody, but in my experience, observation, which is really difficult to do, especially if you think that you're really knowledgeable, if you think you've got a lot to bring to an environment, it's really difficult to, you know, when you're trying to get a player to stand still in a game or a game situation so that they can recognize the pictures and make better decisions. And there was a film made a few years ago, Zinedine Zidane, when he played for Real Madrid, and it's like he had like 89 cameras on him in one game, and it was like watching art. It was fantastic. And so many times he was literally just stood there, and you can be forgiven for thinking, what a boring film. An hour and a half of this fella just stood there, but it was art. And all he was doing was recognizing pictures, small movements. And then when he made his big movement, it's because he had an informed picture in his mind. He recognized the rhythm of the game. So observation, I think, for a coach as well as for players, it's very important to sometimes just slow everything down, stop, and take a look at the environment and recognize what might be key to the environment. Don't stop for too long though, because I think you do need to have some recognition of what should be your first action, you know. So for example, when I arrived here in Faroe Islands, I had to quarantine for 10 days, which was fine, you know. I don't mind talking to myself and watching Netflix, which is great, you know. Watched a lot of Housewives of Beverly Hills and stuff, but it meant that I was forced to observe. So I drove to the field, but no one knew I was there, which happens a lot to me. Anyway, right, so I drove to the field, and I was sat just above our training. Our ground is amazing. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. But so there's a bit of a hilltop. So you can sit in your car and just overlook the football pitch. So I did that for 10 days. So I sat in the car for like 3 hours watching all the sessions. And something which I actually had to say to one of our board members recently is I don't have to be stood next to a coach to know what the session's about. And we're developing players and we're developing people. And I'm sat in the car and I should be able to see what the session's about. And the coach doesn't even need to talk. The players should understand the key messages and the main action points. So I'm sat in the car for 10 days watching sessions, observing. So when it came to actually being free of quarantine and actually being on the field, the players and the coaches weren't aware that I'd already been observing them for 10 days. So my mistake, I'll be honest with you, is when I started to introduce changes, it was, for me, it was based on 10 days of knowledge, but they didn't know. So I'm introducing something to their culture, and the buy-in was like, it was resistance. It was like really challenging, but they didn't know I'd already been observing them. And I always like to know what, you know, what's the aims? What are you looking for us to create? We want players for the first team. Right, well, I've had 10 days. I'll give you another week to get used to my rhythm, but I've done the observations, you know. So I think if I were to do this again, I would probably wait even longer before making introductions to different rhythms to their culture, which is what I did. And I think I probably did the incorrect thing, you know. So leading or lead, do not operate with fear, show an understanding of the role and the passion to inspire others. So I think that that's connected to the idea of just waiting for that connection and respecting the culture. So developing people is what I experienced a lot in China. I was a coordinator, so my job was to make sure that we worked to our goals, and the goal was to try to identify a player for the national team. But the players don't understand the game, so the coaches had to show a lot of patience. So developing the people, it was really important for the coaches to be good people above and beyond anything, you know. So we had a lot of emphasis on our characters, on our personalities, how we spoke to cleaners, how we spoke to the cook at the school, how we introduced ourselves to families, you know, and that had nothing to do with coaching qualification or your background or experience. So I think that aspect to knowing what's important is something that can be easily overlooked and shouldn't be. Sense of citizenship. I like that citizenship terminology, and I think it should apply to football a lot, or soccer a lot. Everyone needs to feel that their coaching has a place and that they have an opportunity to grow. I've left a few roles because I haven't felt that I'm being given an opportunity to have some sort of individuality. I know that there's a lot of money at stake, there's reputation, and there's time. So players don't have time for people to be experimenting with, you know, with how to build up phase 2 or whatever. It's like there is a certain system. But I think that once you're in an environment and you're in a different culture, I think you do need to find a way to listen and to show people that they're being heard. So if you don't have an ability to adapt in that way, there's a big chance that you will either lose your job or you'll lose your audience. For me as a coach, it's something that actually causes me to actually leave a place. So I would leave if I felt that I wasn't part of the environment. And the last bit, supports longevity. I found that often players stay, improve and attract others if they feel connected and engaged to an open environment. So I think that, you know, when your first day back to training after you've played your game, and that's your opportunity for your video analysis, I think that sometimes moments like that, we might make it very, very football related, when it might be a good opportunity for us to look at relationships as well. So like we've had games this weekend, I am expecting coaches to do their analysis on Monday, and the analysis should include some moments where we've done the analysis on the video, but this is a moment for you to actually speak to the player that plays in front of you, or the player that plays beside you, or ask the goalkeeper, what would he have expected in this situation? So I think that you've got to find moments and ways in the culture to make sure people are staying connected, because if they're not connected, I think you're losing opportunities to keep people, and you're losing opportunities to grow your culture as well. So that's been my experience, and that's what I've sometimes tried to do if I remembered. Sometimes, you know, you get carried away with yourself and you don't remember to do the smaller things. So this photograph is, I don't know how that photo comes across, but because I remember the conversation, I like the photo, but I don't know if it looks like we're actually having an argument. It was a good conversation. So that's my assistant in California. And I think most of us who have been like assistant coaches, often you find that players recognize who the key decision maker is. And, you know, there are times when they know the assistant is going to be a bit of an easy touch, or the assistant might not be so tactically astute, or you don't listen to the assistant. I think it's really important in the culture to show that you've got some awareness of being humble, because we're trying to make sure that we have good people around us. So I always knew what it felt like to be an assistant and to feel like I was just there to pick up cones and just pick up the bibs or the pennies or the vests. So I do try, if I'm lucky enough to have an assistant or a coaching team, I do try to make it an inclusive environment, listen to them. And I know that Sir Alex Ferguson, I think every 3 to 5 years, he would change his assistant. And obviously, you know, he retired 2013 or whatever. So maybe what he did back then was fine, but you maybe couldn't do it now. But I think it's just the concept of making sure that the superstructure worked a certain way, but your infrastructure, your culture within your team, so the team within the team, also has a certain rhythm as well. So be prepared to work transparently, be aware of the infrastructure and the importance of the people within that. And also, I am fairly consistent, even if I've got a terrible memory, and you know, I'm aware that I've got a lot to learn, but be consistent, stay true. So always try and figure out what the long-term plan is supposed to be for that environment. And don't be afraid to stick to the plan. Be adaptable, but obviously you can't change with the wind. Do you know what I mean? You've got to show that you have got a sense of purpose in what you do. And that includes connecting your training sessions as well. So you know that your games should reflect what you've worked on during the week. You know that the warm-up or the pre-activation should then resemble something that occurs during the main body of the training session. And the players, I think the players need to know that as well, because then it means you're in a culture of learning. And if a player or a fellow coach doesn't value the detail of what's being done, then I think it's really challenging to make the culture one of growth. So yes, we do have tactics with our throw-ins, and yeah, we do have a set piece specialist, and yeah, we do have to know what we do when the goalkeeper gets sent off. So our culture should not be one of shock value, but one where we are consistent to the possibilities of growth and development within ourselves. Repeatedly share the vision. Not everyone wants to know about your vision. You know, I think that sharing your vision, sometimes you have to just be aware that it's the club vision. So you don't get players following coaches from club to club. You know, you have to know what the club wants, and you have to stay true to maybe the profile of the players. So what should you look like if you're trying to get into the first team? What does your club culture expect your left-sided defender to look like? And just make sure that everybody understands what are our objectives, what's the medium term, long term, and that helps us achieve our goals and not be so worried about not doing something well because we've got the structure, you know. So I think sharing your vision is important for us to stay focused on what we're meant to be achieving as a group. And I think you're lucky if you're able to find that type of environment. Planning your sessions and long-term planning, medium-term planning. I think that's the very basics of what we should be doing. But it depends on the environment you're working in, because I think sometimes, especially if you're in an environment where there's lots of volunteers, or there's it's really like a transparent environment where there's often different people there. You know, if you don't have consistency in an environment with the personnel, I think it's easy to not do the basics so often. So if we can, within our culture, reinforce the basic things, you should expect to see people with paper in their hand and referring to the paper. We should expect to see the tactics board. We should expect to see players reading the tactics board or asking questions about what they're doing. You know, give them the opportunity to know that as well. Give families the opportunity to know that if you're working with youth players. So I think that it's important to sort of share that information, because when you're sharing it, it means that people are also given a chance to grow, and they keep to the expectations as well. You know, I often keep my paper with me, but it doesn't mean I'm looking at it, but it does mean it's with me. I think you should give yourself a chance to actually have that structure with you. This is not the best picture of me. So if you're able to zoom out, this is the moment to zoom out. Do not look. I have a very serious resting face. very serious. So this is one of the local clubs that I worked with in Connecticut. So I think it's important to sometimes just give yourself a little bit of a push, like just to remind yourself about importance of the people around you. I've had to have a conversation with myself about the current culture that I'm in and my expectations as well. So know the levels within the coaching environment. I'm really competitive, and sometimes I don't have an adaptable mind to the people around me, because I would want to know why someone else isn't, you know. But I think that when you start to look within your coaching environment, you should ask questions so that you have different conversations with different people. So do the coaches want to adapt? And how you find that out is completely up to you. It might be open conversations. It might be just an observation. But sometimes you might find that maybe coaches don't know what adaptation looks like. Your fellow coaches might want to know things and they don't feel they can approach you. So I think trying to reflect on how you come across within a culture, it's that difficult for you to do. But if you want to have a successful team where people are open and they are happy to receive information as well as giving information, then I think knowing the levels is important. The key decision makers, so if you've got a board that you work to, so you've got board members. I worked at one club, there were 16 board members. It was like, it's just too many people, you know. But if you've got a board at your club, or if you've just got a chairman or just an owner or a chairperson, it's important to kind of know the rhythm of your bosses, because there'll be times when you have to challenge up. And especially being female, if you're in a different type of culture, there's a big chance that no one's interested in what you've got to say, because it's not normal for them to hear it from a female. And I did experience that recently, and I have experienced it previously. So it's one of those where you've got to look at what are they used to, how can I say something without offending people or saying it in a way that people will hear the message, you know, which is a massive challenge for your personal growth, I think. And I do find it very, very challenging. What is a priority and what is important? So if you're working with youth players within your culture, I think it's one of those where you've got to have the conversations with the people that have brought you in, especially. So find out, and you might have to check and recheck, because sometimes it will change, especially if they get to know you and realize that maybe you're quite forceful with your mode of operating. I think having the conversations about what they want and what they see as what they're looking to achieve, that's another conversation to have, which is also quite challenging but important, I think. Yes, Charles. So this is like I said, Hope Powell, she created a women's mentoring program, and I think that we all need mentors. Even if we think that we are quite astute, you know, I know a lot about the game, I'm quite tactically. No, I think we always need people. I've got an excellent mentor, and he didn't know he was my mentor. I just decided because I thought his brain was so big, you know. So I have a mentor, and he's a really, really decent human being, but he's very, very honest as well. He's very experienced, and so he's not going to tell me things that I want to hear. And I only contact him about actual coaching issues maybe twice a year. But I make sure that I stay connected with him, because I think it's important to have guidance as coaches, because we're guiding players, and I think we need to be open to listening as well. And what drives me was the opportunity that was given by Hope Powell through her mentoring program. So that's me with the England national team, with the U15s, and an opportunity to see how they work at the highest level for that age group. to see the pride amongst the coaching team, the staff, the players that are on the fringe. There are so many players that were there that I worked with at club level. So seeing them at club level and then seeing them in the national team environment, they were two different personalities completely. So it was interesting getting to know them in different environments, which we can all do as club coaches, I think. You know, it's easy to take a player and maybe have them do co-ed training or have them training with older group, or maybe say to them, oh, right, I want you to train with this college team or something similar. So see what drives your players by maybe making them itch, by taking them out of their comfort zone. So I was out of my comfort zone, working within a national team environment. But I think if we're competitive people and if we're educators as football coaches, I think it's important to find out more about the players that we're looking after and the coaches that surround us. So what drives you and what's the player's driver? If you don't know your player's driver, if you don't know why they're there, it might be that they have a tough home life. It might be that they just have been told so much that they're good at football. And it might be that this is the best part of their week. So I think it's important to know and make an effort to find out what drives the team, what drives your individual players as well. So you're probably saying, thank goodness, but this is the last slide. Be an ideas coach. I know we're not all Bielsa, we're not all going to be, you know, Pep Guardiola's, but if you're lucky enough to have an environment and to have, you know, like the enthusiasm non-stop to come up with new solutions and identify new problems, I think that for us to be effective and to stay true to our vision, we have to want to have that itch, you know, the thing that makes us uncomfortable, the thing that makes us develop our own driver. I think that we need to have ideas, steal ideas. Of course, we all do that. We all see things and we just, right, I'm going to take that and change it a little bit. We all do that. But I think it's important to respect that process in our development and in the culture that we're trying to create. So I try to encourage players to have a similar sort of ethos. So the image that you're looking at is one of my U12 players. One of my U12 players, Joss, and she's watching one of my videos probably about team shape. But it's one of those where I'm thinking, how do I communicate with a young Joss? How do I speak to her? And it might turn out that she learns better with the visual aid, but in her own time. So it might be that you've got a player or a fellow coach who needs the alone time for learning, for development, what's in your culture, what's in your environment. So without trying new ideas, you won't know, you know. So that's what I try to do it. Sometimes it doesn't work, you know, sometimes it switches people off, or I've also received a lot of criticism from fellow coaches and from some parents who have seen things that I've been doing and they're like, what is she doing? What's that? You know, and it's one of those where you've just got to have a really thick skin and maybe review what you've done. Maybe it was the wrong thing, you know, but that bravery that we want our players to show in possession, in transitional moments, out of possession, we have to show it as well, regardless of the environment. So that was basically what that image captured, and I really liked that, and her parents sent that to me, and I'm really pleased that they did. So that was basically, in a nutshell, that's my perception of culture within coaching.